Welcome to this explainer. When you think about evolution, it's super tempting to picture this magical, guiding hand shaping life over millions of years. But actually, diving into Charles Darwin's source material reveals something way more profound. Natural selection isn't magic at all. It's a logical, inescapable algorithm. It's literally a mathematical inevitability playing out right in front of us. Let's dig into how it actually works.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the engine of evolution, survival of the fittest, nature's masterpieces and mistakes, upgrading Darwin's theory, and wrap up with the unfinished puzzle.
Part 1. The Engine of Evolution.
What's absolutely brilliant about Darwin's original text is that it doesn't ask you for some huge leap of faith. It just relies on a simple, undeniable four-step equation. First up, overpopulation. Organisms just produce way too many offspring. Second, limited resources. Food and space are scarce, and that creates permanent competition. Third is individual differences, meaning no two animals are exactly identical. And fourth, reproductive success. If you have those first three steps in place, step 4 is a mathematical guarantee. Those with advantageous differences will survive long enough to reproduce.
To really grasp that first step, you just have to look at the sheer reproductive potential out in nature. A single salmon lays thousands of eggs. One oak tree drops thousands of acorns. A single bacterium can double its population in under an hour. Think about it. If every single descendant survived, our planet would be instantly saturated. The fact that we aren't currently buried under a mile-deep layer of oak trees? Well, that's mathematical proof that a massive invisible sorting process is constantly running in the background.
Let's move to part 2, survival of the fittest.
Okay, it's time to do a little myth busting, because what most of us think survival of the fittest means is actually totally wrong. Darwin used the metaphor of a human breeder to explain this. If a breeder wants a fluffier dog, they voluntarily choose those traits with a conscious end goal in mind. Nature, on the other hand, has absolutely no blueprint. It doesn't want a faster horse, it acts purely as a blind filter. What we call selection is literally just the statistical result of who happens to reproduce in a specific environment.
So, in evolutionary biology, fitness has a very specific and honestly totally unglamorous meaning. It does not mean being the biggest, the strongest, or the baddest apex predator out there. It simply means being the individual who leaves the most offspring in a given environment. That's the whole game. The evolutionary finish line is just passing on your traits.
When you look at the real world, fitness can be totally unexpected. A tiny, highly discreet mouse that successfully hides from an eagle is infinitely more fit than a massive, muscular mouse that gets eaten on day one. A stunted, drought-tolerant tree survives a changing climate way better than a towering tree that needs constant rain. Sometimes, the evolutionary lottery goes to the sneaky, the resilient, or even just the bird with the absolute best breeding song, not the strong.
Which brings us to part 3, nature's masterpieces and mistakes. Moving from theory to the tangible evidence, Darwin looked at a massive range of organisms to prove this whole concept. Take orchids, for example. Their extraordinarily specialized shapes literally force insects to bump into their pollen, beautifully showcasing the accumulation of tiny changes over time. Or woodpeckers, armed with a shock-absorbing beak, a long tongue, and a rigid tail, it's a perfect step-by-step toolkit. And paleontology has confirmed that the lungs and bony fins of marine mammals, like whales, are clear evidence of their descent from terrestrial ancestors.
Now, looking at things like jaw-dropping insect camouflage, it is so tempting to view evolution as a master designer. But I want you to pause for a second and ask yourself, is nature actually a perfect engineer?
The answer is a resounding no. Nature is much more of a tinkerer, just working with spare parts. Take the giraffe's recurrent laryngeal nerve. Instead of going a few inches from the brain to the throat, it takes a meters-long detour all the way down around the heart and back up the neck. Or the human eye. Our retinas are literally installed backward, forcing the optic nerve to punch a hole through our vision, giving us a permanent blind spot. And hey, if you've ever had impacted wisdom teeth, you know firsthand that evolution is clumsy, incremental, and incredibly imperfect.
Let's jump to part 4, upgrading Darwin's theory.
So, Darwin figured out the core engine, but science certainly didn't stop in 1859. Before we look at the modern upgrades, we really have to hammer home one vital limitation. Natural selection never prepares a species for future conditions. It is totally blind to tomorrow. A species could be flawlessly adapted to a freezing climate today, but if the environment rapidly warms, that species gets wiped out. An innovation in one context can instantly become a fatal handicap in another.
Because natural selection only acts on the present, it's really just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Remember, Darwin knew absolutely nothing about DNA. Today, our model includes genetic mutations, random drift, and gene flow from migrations. We also factor in chromosomal recombinations, sexual selection, the rigid constraints of embryonic development, and even epigenetics, where the environment actually influences gene expression. The modern theory is deeply complex, but it doesn't replace Darwin's intuition. It just gives it a massive high-definition upgrade.
All these modern discoveries culminate in what's called population genetics. Basically, it's the mathematical modeling of how advantageous allele frequencies increase over generations. Where Darwin could only observe qualitative changes, like a beak getting slightly larger over time, today's scientists can literally track the exact genetic frequencies shifting in a population generation by generation. We finally have the hard math to prove his 19th century observations.
And finally, part 5, the unfinished puzzle.
As we wrap up this explainer, it is definitely worth slowing down to appreciate that, for all of Darwin's genius, he knew he was presenting an unfinished puzzle. What makes him such a phenomenal scientist is how openly he addressed his own gaping holes. He freely admitted he had no idea how traits were actually transmitted or why new variations randomly appeared. He agonized over missing intermediate fossil forms and wondered why some species remained perfectly stable for millions of years. He didn't hide from his critics. He laid out the objections himself.
Yet, despite those initial mysteries, this core loop remains the absolute, undisputed foundation of biology. Initial variation exists, competition occurs, differential reproduction favors those best suited to that specific moment, and that trait increases in the population. It is a continuous, relentless cycle. Once you understand this simple algorithm, it completely changes how you view every plant, animal, and ecosystem you'll ever encounter.
But even deeply understanding this elegant loop, Darwin was still haunted by one biological marvel. He admitted that imagining his simple blind process could somehow create something so dizzyingly complex, so flawless in its optics, seemed absolutely absurd. It leaves us with a really provocative thought that continues to fascinate biologists today. If evolution is totally blind and pursues absolutely no purpose, how do you explain the evolution of the eye? Well, that is a mystery we'll just have to dive into next time. Keep questioning the incredible world around you.